my review and testing of these Perma-grit sanding blocks. Welcome to another in my continuing series of let me buy stupid expensive tools and test them out so you don't have to. Today I'm looking at these Perma-grit sanding blocks, and I bought two of them. One is this contoured one, which is a fine grit sanding block, and the other is this long straight wedge shaped block, which is both coarse and fine. Now these sanding blocks are, the grit, the abrasive, is tungsten carbide, which is supposed to be the second hardest substance known to man. The only thing harder than tungsten carbide is diamonds. So you should be able to use this sanding block to sand anything. Marble, stone, steel, and obviously soft things like wood and plastic that are more commonly used in our hobby. I'm actually going to test this on a piece of marble. Now, I obtained these from Micromark, and this is being filmed in January of 2021, so that's when these prices are good, but these are the prices out of the current Micromark catalog. $29.45 for the 5.5-inch long contoured sanding block, and $44.95 for the larger wedge-shaped block. So that's 75 bucks for these two tools. So hence the title of this video was The World's Most Expensive Sandpaper. However, the manufacturer claims that these blocks will outlast 40,000 sheets of standard sandpaper. That's right, 40,000. I have a feeling that is well over, that's probably multiple lifetime supplies for a professional woodworker. So in reality, these could very well be the cheapest sandpaper, the cheapest sandpaper ever. They are a pretty big upfront investment, but they're certainly going to be a lot easier to store around your workshop than a whole bunch of sheets of sandpaper. Now, it's really nice that the wedge-shaped block comes with a coarse and a fine. I've seen on the internet indicating that the coarse is the equivalent of 60 grit sandpaper, and that the fine is the equivalent of 120 grit sandpaper. I've got to tell you, the fine seems really super fine to me, much finer than 120 grit sandpaper. The coarse is quite coarse. Now, before we get into a demonstration of the sanding blocks, I have to say that these things are downright brobdingnagian. They're absolutely huge. You're probably familiar with lilliput and illiputian, meaning something very small. This comes from Jonathan Swift's book, Gulliver's Travels, where he visited the land of Lilliput, and probably the most famous image from that story is of Gulliver lying on the sand when he washes up on the beach, and all the little Lilliputians have tied him down with all these tiny little ropes. So you're probably familiar with that. A lesser known part of that story is that Gulliver also visited a land called Brobdingnag, and there the people were giants. The Brobdingnagians were huge, and Gulliver was very small. And so when we say brobdingnagian, we mean something that's gigantic. Well, these tools are gigantic. They are really for full-size work. You know, if you're working on layout bench work, or maybe you're sanding down larger items, maybe big resin castings or something like that, then these large coarse surfaces are going to come in really handy. But these tools are not necessarily for fine work and detail work on your models. They're just too big. Now, the manufacturer does make needle files and a smaller set, and I'll talk about that later in my recommendation if you decide to get some of these tools. Now, the first thing that I tested these tools out on was this. This is a whole nutmeg, and over the holidays I used the fine grit to actually sand down the nutmeg into my eggnog. Quite tasty, I might add. But it did clog up the fine contour sanding block, which is what I use. You can see a picture here that shows I didn't get all of the residue out, even after washing it lightly with a little bit of water. Now, admittedly, this nutmeg is very soft, very resinous, kind of woody substance, so it might not be a fair test. So we'll see as I go through testing these sand blocks on various materials. Now here's my first test on a piece of marble. This is a marble tile I got for free because it had this chip out of it. And I made a sanding surface out of it. See my other video about that. I'm going to start with the coarse side of the wedge-shaped sanding block. And I've got to say, it's very light with this aluminum casting, really well done. The ergonomics of it are excellent. So it's really a delight to use. But you'll notice when I'm done here, so now it did work perfectly, but notice below the debris from the sanding process. There's some fine stuff, which is the marble, but the bigger chips are actually pieces of the abrasive. So if you did a lot of sanding on marble, I think it would destroy the sanding block. Now here I am doing some sanding on plastic, just a piece of sprue to test this out. Not really easy to do. I probably should have had a vise and clamped the plastic down, but you can see that it's working fine, but it is leaving some residue. It is kind of clogging the abrasive, which the manufacturer said wouldn't happen. When I felt with my finger, I couldn't feel any difference, so maybe it's just discoloration and it would be fine. Here I am doing the same thing on the fine side of the block, and you can see that the residue being left is even more. But again, when I felt it with my finger, I didn't really feel that the abrasive quality had been reduced or that the clogging was really going to be a material issue. Now here's my last test, which is on a piece of hardwood. I believe it's walnut. And you see here on the rough side, obviously it works very easily, and it really didn't get very clogged up. It really worked pretty nicely. Great for woodworking, frankly. I think these brobdingnagian tools are absolutely excellent for working with wood. Here I am using the fine side of the wedge-shaped block, and you can already see that the walnut colored is starting to collect on the abrasive. Again, when I felt it, I really didn't feel like it was getting smoother and losing its abrasive qualities, but nonetheless, I wonder if over time it might. Can't really tell. Require a much longer test to determine. Well, there you have it, my review of these brobdingnagian sanding blocks from Perma-grit and Micromark. As I said, they are brobdingnagian, and so I really would recommend, if you're going to spend the kind of crazy money, in the $100 range for these tools, I think I would recommend this set in the fine of, admittedly it's close to $100, but I think this really would be very useful around the workbench. A lot of different shapes. The coarse is just super coarse, and it's not something you're probably going to use very frequently on models, but the fine is something that you probably would use. If I had this to do over again, I would definitely buy this $91.95 set with 8 different tools and a wrap to store them. I think that might be a really good investment, and it might replace a whole bunch of sandpaper around your shop, at least for doing your modeling work. Until next time, this is Bob Johnson with PK&W Railroad Model Works, signing off. Keep on modeling.